It's good to see everyone tonight. We have a good number this evening. We had a really good number this morning. We had over 90. Had quite a few visitors. I was thankful for all of them. I was thankful for all of our faithful members that returned back on Sunday evening and Wednesday evening. We're encouraged by your presence. I want to thank you for your faithfulness. As Brian mentioned tonight, lesson being some characteristics of Abraham. Of course, one of those characteristics that we're all familiar with is his great faith. And so we'll talk a little bit about that in one of the points, but there's also some other characteristics of Abraham that we want to consider tonight. These are just 7. I probably could come up with some others, but for time's sake, we'll limit it to these 7. We can take a lot of example, we can take a lot of inspiration, a lot of encouragement from Abraham. This is a man who is, we've talked, has exhibited great faith, has shown great faith in his life. Of course, obviously he had his moments where his faith maybe was not what it should have been. He was a human being with faults and frailties, and there were times when he was not maybe the perfect example. Obviously, the only perfect example we have would be Christ himself, but we look at Abraham as a whole and look at his life and some of the different events that affected him. And of course, Kevin's lesson this morning talking about our lives is kind of as a book, and talking about the chapters that we go through and the different things that we have to face. And sometimes they're good chapters, and sometimes there's bad chapters. And of course, Abraham, like all human beings, went through these different times and had these different chapters in his life. And because most of the times he was able to make the best of the situation, he was able to take what he was going through and able to react and respond and make good decisions and make the right decision that was pleasing and acceptable to God. And he's one of those that is mentioned in Hebrews chapter 11. Many that are listed there because of their faithfulness, because of the lives, the righteous lives that they lived to God. They are noted there in the 11th chapter of Hebrews, and they're to be recognized for what they did. We can take from their examples and try to emulate that, try to copy that in our lives. And so I want to look this evening at just some examples in Abraham's life, and then maybe try to draw some parallels, look at some examples maybe in our lives today where we can draw on Abraham's decisions, draw on Abraham's responses to some of the challenges that he faced. Some of these chapters in his book, as Kevin talked about this morning, and use that in our lives. So we'll look at these examples. And so first of all, we want to, as we said, looking at 7. First of all, the obedience that he showed to God in leaving his home. He's going to go off into a far land to take control of that. The unselfishness that he shows once he reaches that land, willing to split the land that he has been given with his nephew Lot. His courage. Obviously, there's different times in his life that he showed great courage. Now, there were some times when he didn't show much courage. Whenever he went to Egypt as they were making their way to this land, and as they make us kind of a pit stop in Egypt, so to speak, and he was fearful that his wife would be taken because she was a beautiful woman, and so he kind of shows a little bit different side there, and so wasn't always courageous, but obviously we'll talk about one instance where he showed great courage. The benevolence that he's going to show, the integrity that he has in his life, and these middle 3 points, 3, 4, and 5, those are going to go along kind of surrounding one event, and we're going to see those 3 characteristics all tied up in this one event. And then to continue on talking about his prayer life. And for me, I do not spend the appropriate amount of time in prayer like I should. Just like so many people, it seems like whenever there's something comes up that's a problem that we face, or something that's challenging to us, and that's when we want to turn to prayer. It has to be in all phases, all facets, and in all chapters of our life. Talking about his faith overall, just the wonderfulness of his faith as a whole, and so again, trying to take some examples from him. First of all, I want to look at the obedience that he shows, and I don't have these scriptures, some of these passages, there's several verses, and just to save the number of slides and all, I don't have them up on the screen tonight like I do from time to time. So we're going to be looking at some of these passages, so if you'd like to follow along in your Bibles, we'll turn to Genesis chapter 12. We'll begin in verse 1. be reading from the New King James Version, Genesis chapter 12, beginning in verse 1. And I'll try to stand still for the camera. Kevin gave me a hard time. He says, I can't chase you around the room with the camera, and I understand that. In class, I'm wandering around the room. You got to do that to make sure the kids are paying attention and they're not working on their math homework instead of doing history. And once in a while, I have to kick a chair or something to wake somebody up. So I'm used to kind of wandering around while I'm talking. And of course, on the football, baseball field, you just don't stand still when you're coaching. So I'm used to being on the move, but I'll try to stand still for the most part. Beginning in verse 1. Now the Lord had said to Abram, get out of your country, from your family and from your father's house, to a land I will show you. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse him who curses you. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. He's being told to pack up and leave, leaving behind his family, his friends, basically the life that he had known for a great part of his life. He's going to be obedient. He's going to follow God's commands. Verse 4, Abram departed as the Lord had spoken to him, and Lot went with him. And Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. Then Abram took Sarah his wife, and Lot his brother's son, and all their possessions that they had gathered, and the people whom they had acquired in Haran, and they departed to go to the land of Canaan. So they came to the land of Canaan. So he's going to obey God's commands. He's going to pack up, and he's going to leave and go into this unfamiliar land because God told him to. Now, obviously, from time to time, people may have to pack up and move because of a job. You get a promotion or maybe a different job with a different company or corporation or things like that. Maybe a better opportunity for family. Sometimes it may be moving just a short distance. It may involve moving across the country, or perhaps maybe, depending upon maybe working for certain types of companies, you may have to move halfway around the world. And to do so, obviously, is difficult in a lot of different ways. Again, severing those ties of friendship that you may have with your friends and neighbors, maybe the co-workers that you've been working with at the location where you were. With children, obviously, trying to have them leave their friends and the relationships that they developed, whether it's school or with neighbors or whatever. That's difficult. But we understand for the purpose of providing a better life or providing a better opportunity for a family. People do this all the time. Of course, in the last nearly 20 years since 9/11, you see an even greater occurrence of people moving from place to place. Before 9/11, you just didn't see the movement like we've seen since then. Of course, in teaching school, we see this. Kids, instead of maybe them coming, to Marlow or to Rush Springs from Enid or from Altus or from McAllister or something, maybe moving within the state, we'll get kids in. Where are you from? Oh, we're from California, or we're from Alaska, or and I'm just amazed, that, well, how did you wind up here? Well, some moving obviously to join or to maybe rejoin with family, or maybe it's moving from living with mom to dad or vice versa, something like that. But some of them moves, well, my dad got a job or mom got a job or this, that. And so, that has to be a difficult thing for these families. But obviously they're doing it for the situation that it is best for them. But to just do so because God had commanded you. It said Abram was 75 years old. Well, I don't like moving at all, okay? Made this statement several times before. We built our house there next to Lita, and we got moved in there, and we kind of got moved in and settled. I told Angie, I said, all right, you're going to move me one more time. And that's to the cemetery. If I never move again, that's fine. I don't like moving. Some people enjoy that. And some people, that's a part of, I guess, their jobs or their career that they enjoy. I've got a lot of coaches that are friends, and just every 2 or 3 years, they're at a different school. They're here, they're there. And maybe there's certain situations that force the move, but some of them just like going and seeing different places and living in different places, and that's great. And a lot of people do that. That's not me. Especially if someone told me to move when I was 75 years old. That can't be easy. Of course, today with all of our furniture and the things that we have, you say, well, Abram, he had a tent and, maybe some other, shouldn't have been that big a deal, but he's 75 years old. Here 2 or 3 weeks ago, helped a friend of ours get a U-Haul truck packed. He was moving to Weatherford. And so we spent 3 or 4 hours loading furniture and everything like that. And we got done, I'd give out. don't like moving. That's hard work, okay? But to be told to move, hundreds of miles away to, and now you can load up the U-Haul and take off and go, and it's a much easier situation for them. They're moving on foot, they're on horseback, or on the back of a donkey, or some type of animal. And so the obedience that he showed because God told him to move is something that we can take heart in, and that we can be encouraged by. Is that even though this was going to not be just an easy situation, and going into a lot of unknowns. Usually whenever these people today are moving from one place to another, maybe they already have a house found, or they've already had that job determined, their landing spot is kind of settled. For Abram, I mean, he's going into the unknown with his family and with his servants and with his possessions. And he doesn't know what he's going to find when he gets there. But he's willing to obey God because God simply told him to pack up and go and to inherit this land, and that God said, I'm going to take care of you, I'm going to bless you, and he was willing to do so. Are we willing to kind of step out on that limb today? Are we willing to take those opportunities that maybe come before us, and are we willing to accept those challenges and trust in what God is telling us, and trust that God will watch over us and God will take care of us? Second example that we want to look at, the second characteristic, is going to be the unselfishness that he shows. If we go over to Genesis chapter 13, there in verse 1, after they had taken this little pit stop there in Egypt, we mentioned there in the introduction, beginning of verse 1 of Genesis 13, Abraham went up from Egypt, he and his wife and all that he had, and Lot with him to the south. And Abram was very rich in livestock, in silver and in gold. He went on his journey from the south as far as Bethel, to the place where his tent had been at the beginning, between Bethel and Ai, to the place of the altar which he had made there at first. And there Abram called on the name of the Lord. Lot also, who went with Abram, had flocks and herds and tents. Now the land was not able to support them, that they might dwell together, for their possessions were so great that they could not dwell together. And there was strife between the herdsmen of Abram's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock. The Canaanites and the Perizzites then dwelt in the land. So Abram said to Lot, please let there be no strife between you and me, and between my herdsmen and your herdsmen, for we are brethren. Is not the whole land before you? Please separate from me. If you take the left, then I will go to the right, or if you go to the right, then I will go to the left. And Lot lifted his eyes and saw all the plain of Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere. This is before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, like the garden of the Lord, talking about it was very lush and very fertile, like the Garden of Eden, like the land of Egypt as you go towards Zoar. Then Lot chose for himself all the plain of Jordan, and Lot journeyed east. And they separated from each other. Abram dwelt in the land of Canaan, and Lot dwelt in the cities of the plain, and pitched his tent even as far as Sodom. Once they reached this land that God had told Abram to pack up and to move there with his family and his possessions, and when they arrive, obviously there is plenty of land to go around, but because both he and Lot had such great herds and had such a number of servants, they've both been greatly blessed by God, they couldn't live side by side. They couldn't live next door to each other. And so they had to split up. And it's interesting here because Abram, being the uncle, being the older individual here, you'd say, well, he deserves to pick and choose where he wants to live. But his unselfishness, the fact that he's going to allow Lot to choose which that he wants, and then Abram said, you go here, I'll go there, vice versa. That's so different from the world that we see today. People are so selfish, and they're so caught up in their own ambition and their greed, and what can they get for themselves, and they don't stop to think about other people. They don't concern themselves with others and their needs or their wants or what would be in their best interest as well. Sometimes whenever you divide up, it's not easy even when you divide, because sometimes maybe it's not divided equally. Growing up, whenever there was one last biscuit that Dad had baked in the morning, or there's whatever was left over on the dinner table, and Brian and I was going to fight over who was going to get it. And Mom, said, okay, whenever you divide, the other decide. Split it up, and then the other person gets to choose which one they want. And so we made that work, I guess, the best we could. But you think about that as you're going to divide it up and then let the other person have the choice. Well, that's what Abram's doing here. The land is going to be divided, and he says, like, you take whatever you want. And he's going to be willing to accept whatever is left over because, again, he's still trusting in God. He's been obedient to move into this land, and he knows that God is going to bless him. And so I think we can take a great example from his attitude of unselfishness. willing to make sure that, of course, it's his family member, his nephew, is going to make sure that he has what he wants and has what he needs, and he's taken care of. And then Abram said, hey, and then we'll make do with whatever's left over, because he realized again that he had been greatly blessed and had the great herds and had all the servants and all, and so he knew that he was still going to be fine. But again, it's very different from what you see in the world today. He was willing to put somebody else before him. He was willing to look to the needs of others, And so again, as we're talking about some of the things we can do in the congregation here, of course, coming up Saturday, the haircuts that we're offering for the students that are heading back to school, and that's a great thing. And we've been talking about maybe possibly some other things that we can do, looking to try to help others and to show this unselfishness. We've been greatly blessed, and what can we do to give and to share with others and give some of what we have, and whether it's talents like being able to cut hair, or maybe it's other things. And he was talking about this morning. I was talking with Rick Gilland, and he just mentioned about the kids that he sees a lot of times at school or here or there places, and as you get to the winter time, and kids running around still in short sleeve shirts and without maybe a heavy jacket. Now sometimes it's just because kids don't care. I mean they're going to run around, they're going to do whatever if mom or dad doesn't tell them to put on a jacket. And they get up and leave for school in the morning. If not paying attention, they'll get out the door without one. But there are a lot of kids who don't have that heavy coat. So we're talking about, well, maybe that's something we can look to do maybe this fall as we go into the winter, maybe having a coat drive or something like that. Because those of us that have children, I mean, we can't keep braiding clothes. I mean, every time we turn around, he's needing a bigger shoe, he's needing bigger jeans. I mean, so we've got a lot of clothes that he's grown out of, and maybe those things that we can share. Maybe it's a coat, or maybe it's other. So just kind of throwing that out there. But there's a lot of ways that we can show that same unselfishness, and being willing to share and to give to others from what we've been blessed with. Next, we want to look at the courage that is shown by Abraham. As we can go over to chapter 14, we have the instance where you have two sets of kings there in this land, where next to where Abram is residing, where he's living, and these two sets of kings, there's 4 in one group and 5 in the other, and they're going to wind up going to war with each other. And in the aftermath, or in the events of this war, the fighting that takes place, Lot is going to be captured. The land where he lives is going to be captured. So he and his family are all taken into captivity. And so they're going to rebel. And starting there in verse 4 of Genesis 14, it says, 12 years they served Chedorlaomer, and I'm fixing to get into some names, and I'm going to say them real fast so it sounds like I know what I'm talking about and know how to pronounce them. But obviously I'll probably mess up on some of them. So if you know how to pronounce it correctly, you can tell me later and we'll try to fix it next time. But anyway, in the 14th year, Chedorlaomer and the kings that were with him came and attacked the Rephaim and Ashtaroth Karnaim, the Zuzim and Ham, the Emim and Shaveh, Kiriathim, and the Horites in their mountain of Seir, as far as El Paran, which is by the wilderness. And they turned back and came to En Mishpat, that is Kadesh, and attacked all the country of the Amalekites, and also the Amorites who dwelt in Hazazon Tamar. And the king of Sodom, the king of Gomorrah, the king of Admah, the king of Zeboam, and the king of Bela, that is Zoar, went out and joined together in battle in the valley of Siddim against Chedorlaomer, king of Elam, Tidal, king of nations, Amraphel, king of Shinar, and Arioch, king of Elasar, 4 kings against 5. Verse 10. Now the valley of Siddim was full of asphalt pits, and the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled. Some fell there, and the remainder fled to the mountains. Then they took all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their provisions and went their way. They also took Lot, Abram's brother's son, who dwelt in Sodom, and his goods, and departed. So we see that they have begun this war. The fighting has started. Lot is going to be captured. There, verse 13, one who had escaped came and told Abram the Hebrew, for he dwelt by the terebinth trees of Mamre the Amorite, brother of Eshcol and brother of Aner, and they were allies with Abram. Now when Abram heard that his brother was taken captive, he armed his 318 trained servants who were born in his own house, and went in pursuit as far as Dan. He divided his forces against them by night, and he and his servants attacked them and pursued them as far as Hobah, which is north of Damascus. So he brought back all the goods, and also brought back his brother Lot and his goods, as well as the women and the people. So when he finds out that his family has been captured, has been taken basically prisoner during this war. He immediately is going to put together his own little army. He had 318 men who were servants of his, who he says were born into his own house. So they were, his servants, his shepherds, whatever jobs that they had within his operation there. And so he's going to take them, and they're going to go in, and they're going to attack these kings, attack these forces that had invaded the land, and is able to defeat them. Well, obviously, we would be willing to do whatever was necessary to try to help out our own family, or maybe even friends, if they were in a spot where they had been captured or kidnapped or things like that. Of course, Hollywood is, there's a whole list of movies kind of following a plot line, a storyline like this. There's the Taken movies where a man, the first one, his daughter's kidnapped, and the next one, his wife's kidnapped, and then he's getting, anyway, he's got this special set of skills, and he's going to track them down, he's going to find them, he's going to rescue his family, and he's going to kill everybody. Well, he kind of operates on his own. Has a few friends, I guess, that help him at times along the way, but he's just going to go into these situations, seemingly blindly, just goes in and just start shooting, start punching people, and he's going to rescue his family. Well, obviously, that's Hollywood and those types of movies, but we understand that we would go to great lengths to try to help our family or friends that have fallen into peril, that have fallen into situations where they've been taken against their will, they've been taken captive. Now, obviously, in today's world that we live in, you have these situations, and then a lot of times the kidnappers or those maybe are asking for a ransom or things like that, and if we had the money, it would be willingly would pay the money or would do whatever they ask, to make sure that we get the safe return of our family members, our friends, whoever it may be. I don't know that many of us would be able to just take up arms and get an army of people together like Abram did, and to go out and to rescue and to bring back Lot and his possessions and all of the other people, the women and the other people, as it says there in the end of verse 16. But just the courage that is shown here by Abram. He's willing to do whatever is necessary, knowing that God is on his side, that God is going to protect him, and God's going to guide him and give him and his men the strength and the ability to overcome these invaders and to do whatever is necessary to rescue these family and friends. And so into a dangerous situation, into a difficult situation, he was willing to go without hesitating, without thinking twice. Would we be willing to go into these difficult situations and not have any doubt that, well, God's on our side, and so if that's the case, then we're going to be successful. We're going to be able to overcome. We're going to be able to do whatever is necessary in these situations to be successful, or I guess in this instance, to be victorious, and to be able to rescue those that have been taken captive. Of course, you could use this to go along with any number of events or any other challenges that we face in life, but just seeing his courage and his willingness to do whatever, and get his men together and go fight and to save Lot and his family. And so the courage that is shown by Abram should be an encouragement to us as well. After he was victorious, he is going to be met by one of the kings, the king of Salem, Melchizedek. Of course, we're familiar with that name. The name Melchizedek actually means righteous king, and it's kind of an interesting situation with him because he's not only the king, but he's also the priest. He's the religious leader. And of course, that mirrors some of the, I guess, the civilizations of the world at that time. You think about in the Egyptian civilizations, they viewed their pharaoh as kind of a god king, and in other civilizations, they viewed their leader as to be both their physical and religious or spiritual leader. And so, likewise, Melchizedek was holding both of those positions. In verse 18, Genesis chapter 14, it says, Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was the priest of God Most High, and he blessed him and said, Blessed be Abram of God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who's delivered your enemies into your hand. Well, in this first part of this passage here, we see that Melchizedek comes out, and what does he bring? He brings bread and wine. Well, this is interesting because this was kind of the common, I guess, meal, or the kind of the common, kinds of foods that king would have eaten during that day and time. Those were the kind of things that were reserved. That was kind of the staple of their diets. And so for him to bring out this food, this bread and this wine, kind of an interesting situation where he's providing to Abram from his own table, from what he would be given as king. This was food that would be normally reserved for the royalty, for the king. Of course, you don't have time to get into it, but you could also draw some interesting parallels and some comparisons. You think about he's offering this bread and wine to Abram. Of course, later on Christ, as a form of Melchizedek, he is going to use these same two food items, these same two items for this feast that he's going to ask us to partake of each week in remembrance of his sacrifice and all. So again, there's some interesting stories here, some side notes that just don't have time to get into tonight, but maybe some things that you'd like to study or look into a little bit deeper on your own. But anyways, Melchizedek is trying to bless him. It's trying to give him this offering, basically thanking him for what he had done and helping to free them and to save them and all. And we see that Abram, as you continue on in these verses, there at the end of verse 20, it says that he gave him a tithe of all. Well, Abram is going to be offered these gifts of bread and wine from Melchizedek, and after Abram had defeated these kings and had rescued Lot and rescued their families and taken back all their possessions, and just like in wartime, those that are victorious, are able to take the spoils. To the victor belong the spoils. He was able to take from all these things once he defeated these other kingdoms, these other kings and all. So he's bringing back just a great amount of wealth with him. And it's interesting to note that he's going to actually give to Melchizedek, the priest. Now, there's some today that will say, "Well, this is kind of the commandment that we should still tithe today and do these things." And again, this is another one of those that a lot of things that we could talk about here and look at a little bit more in depth in this situation. But we know that a lot of the early civilizations, that was kind of a part of their custom and culture, is that they would give a portion. Of course, we know that you go back to the Garden of Eden, whenever Cain and Abel, they were required to offer sacrifice. They were basically giving back to God a portion of what they had been blessed with. So this idea of giving, Abram is just setting an example, in all of this spoil that he had gained. And it wasn't that he had worked hard. We think about today, whenever we give of our offering, it's our salaries, as we're working, as we're getting money from the work that we're performing, and we're being blessed monetarily in that manner, and we give back to God a portion of that. That's from our work. That's what we're doing for our salary. These spoils, these gains that he had collected, this was from being victorious in war, and so he's going to take from that, and he's going to give from that. And so it's interesting to note that he kind of sets this example. Of course, if you jump down, I think it's in chapter 28 of Genesis, we see his descendants. I see an instance where Jacob is going to talk about giving a tithe. He's going to give that which he's been blessed by God. So he's kind of setting up for his family and setting up for the generations to come. The need to understand that we have to give of what we've been blessed. We talked about that a little bit earlier in one of the previous points. We were talking about his unselfishness, and we think about the opportunities that we may have, to give to others and to help others. And you never know, what the situation is, and we've had people who come here to church, and they'll come right toward the end of services, or maybe come between class and AM services. They'll need some money. They need some money for gas. They need money for car parts, or any number of things, whatever it may be. And we hate to turn these people away, because you never know what their situation may be. We know that there are those who obviously are doing this dishonestly. There's a lot of people who are looking for handouts or asking for handouts, and it's their way of making extra or making money. There's a story of an older man and woman who were standing on a street corner asking for handouts, and someone just kind of parked and was watching them for a little while late in the day, and then whenever I guess rush hour was over in the evening and traffic kind of lightened up a little bit, watched them, and they walked across the road, walked across the parking lot, and got in a Cadillac and drove off. So some people obviously are doing this dishonestly, but you never know when we have an opportunity to help others. We were in Tulsa this last week for Coach's Clinic, and one day, I guess it was Tuesday maybe, we drove downtown. We were just driving around and showing the kids some really neat architecture, just some beautiful buildings. The old Boston Avenue Methodist Church building, and some of those places, just some really neat buildings there in downtown Tulsa, just kind of showing them some of the sights. And we stopped, there's a place called Hertz Donuts. I know some of you probably have eaten at Hertz Donuts. So we'd heard about them, and so we were going to get some for breakfast the next morning. And so stopped, and as we parked and we're getting out of the car, as we're walking down the sidewalk, there's a woman standing there asking for some help. She said, "Can you give me some money? I haven't eaten in several days. I need to buy some groceries." Well, I didn't have small bills on me. I usually don't carry a lot of cash, and so I said, "Well, let me get some cash in here. Let me get some change, and I'll get back with you." And, got with her and said, "Listen, don't want you buying drugs. I don't want you buying alcohol." Of course, she was, "Oh, no. I'm going to go right down here." And she named a grocery store because I wasn't familiar with it. She said, "I'm going to go down here and buy some groceries." And, well, maybe she did, maybe she didn't. I don't know. And but I guess maybe you could sleep a little bit better at night, thinking, well, maybe I've helped somebody. And that's just one instance, and not looking for a pat on the back or anything like that. But just think of the opportunities that we have each day to help those and to show benevolence to others and to give to others when we have an opportunity. We're kind of continuing on with this thought, with the events surrounding this battle, this war, and Lot being captured. As we go on down to verse 21, King of Sodom said to Abram, "Give me the persons," talking about all the individuals that had been captured by Abram and his men, "and take the goods for yourself." But Abram said to the king of Sodom, "I have raised my hand to the Lord God Most High, the possessor of heaven and earth, that I will take nothing, from a thread to a sandal strap, and that I will not take anything that is yours, lest you should say, I have made Abram rich, except only what the young men have eaten, and the portion of the men who went with me, Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre, let them take their portion." Well, Abram had an opportunity to become even richer. He had been blessed greatly by God, and taking the spoils of this battle was an opportunity to just add, put more in the bank account, so to speak, just to add to his possessions and his wealth. But the integrity that he shows is interesting because, again, so many people in the world today looking for ways to cut corners or to cheat or lie or whatever it is, so that they can take advantage of a situation, so that they can get things that maybe they didn't come by, through fair work or hard work or through normal circumstances. Here's an opportunity for him to take what, according to the tradition, say, well, that's rightfully yours. You won the battle, so you got to keep those things. He says, no, because I don't want somebody thinking that that this has been given to me and I had it, and that's how I became rich. He wants to do it honestly and do it the right way. And so, interestingly, he's not going to take from these things. Now, he wants the men that helped him to get what is rightfully theirs. But just the integrity that is shown here by Abram is another example we can look to. Well, we're familiar with the instances there in chapter 18 of Genesis, where God has decided that He's going to destroy the land where Sodom and Gomorrah are located because of their sin, because of their unrighteousness. And so Abraham at this point is going to step in, trying to save these cities, trying to intervene and to do what he can, because he knows that his nephew Lot and his family live there, and that's where they reside, and that's where their possessions are. And so trying to save these from destruction. And so as you go down through here, God is telling Abraham what he is going to do, that he's going to destroy these cities. The Lord said there in verse 20, because the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great, because their sin is very grave, I will go down now and see whether they have done altogether according to the outcry against it that has come to me, and if not, I will know. And the men turned away from there and went towards Sodom, but Abraham stood still before the Lord. Abraham came near and said, would you also destroy the righteous with the wicked? Suppose there were 50 righteous within the city. Would you also destroy the place and not spare it for the 50 righteous that were in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing as this, to slay the righteous with the wicked, so that the righteous should be as the wicked. Far be it from you. Shall not the judge of all the earth do right? And so he's asking that God spare Sodom for 50 righteous people. And so God says, okay, if I can find 50 righteous people, I will spare all the place for their sakes. And it's interesting that Abraham kind of gets to thinking about the situation and says, well, suppose there were 5 less in the 50. What if there's only 45? What would you do? And God says, if I find there 45, I will not destroy it. He says, well, suppose there should be 40 found there. And God says, I will not do it for the sake of 40. Let not the Lord be angry, there in verse 30. Suppose 30 should be found there. And God says, I will not do it if I find 30 there. And he continues to go on. And what if there's 20? And God says, I will not destroy it if there's 20. And then again to 10. What if 10 should be found there? And God says, I will not destroy it for the sake of 10. So Abraham at this point, as we said, is not going to give up on his requests of God, his prayer to the Lord. He's going to continue to try to ask for Sodom to be spared. And I think we consider a lot of times when we pray for things and maybe we don't see an immediate answer, or maybe the answer that we see is not the one that we want. It's just real easy to give up. It's just real easy to stop praying. It's real easy just to give up on continuing to ask God for what it is that we feel like that we need, or to make these entreatments toward Him. And so we see that God is patient, God is kind, God is generous. As He starts out, He's going to destroy Sodom if they can only find 50. And as Abraham continues to pray, as he continues to ask Him, God is willing to work with him, and eventually says, okay, I will not destroy it for the sake of 10. Now we know that they weren't even able to find 10 located there. And eventually God does destroy Sodom because of their sinfulness, because of their unrighteousness. But it's interesting to note Abraham's his continued prayer, his willingness to continue on and to keep praying, his perseverance in prayer, I guess, is maybe the best way to look at it. And so sometimes when we don't have that immediate answer, that right answer that we're looking for, continuing to pray and trust that in the end God's going to give us what we need, or what it is that we think we want, if that's His decision, if it's His will for us. And so we need to continue to pray. Keep praying. Don't stop and just say, well, I didn't get it, so it's just not going to happen. Okay? Continue to pray, and so that faithfulness in prayer. And finally, what most people would recognize Abraham for, his act of faithfulness, trying to imagine his obedience to God, as we talked about in the first point. That can kind of tie in with this point. As we look in chapter 22, we're not going to read all these verses here because we know the story, familiar with it, and then for time's sake, we're going a little bit long. I apologize, appreciate your continued patience and your attention. But we know that Abram is going to be told by God to take this son Isaac that he and his wife Sarah had waited so long for, and to take him, and eventually he's going to be offered as a burnt offering. He was told to offer this sacrifice, to give this offering. And when they arrived at the place, the location where God had told them to go, and it doesn't have anything, it doesn't have that lamb. And so whenever Isaac says, we got the fire, we got the wood, but where's the lamb? There in verse 7. And Abraham says, my son, God will provide Himself the lamb for a burnt offering. And so they continue to build the altar, get it set up, and then he binds Isaac, his son, lays him on the altar of wood. And we know he's there preparing to end his life, offering that sacrifice, that life that had been given to he and his wife, that they had waited so long and so patiently for. He's willing to give that life back to God, to give his son back to Him. And so trying to understand that sacrifice, we wouldn't hesitate to give our own lives for family or maybe friends. We know people who have done that, whether it's maybe in wartime situations. We hear stories of combat where soldiers have given their lives to save other men in their unit or in their platoon or things like that. We know people oftentimes may not have to give their lives, but they give of their health to a degree. We have people who have given organs, maybe a kidney or something like that, who've donated to help someone else that's struggling with their health, to help them to live. And so that's a big sacrifice. And obviously we wouldn't hesitate to give our lives for our family, for our children. Okay, as parents, we would willingly lay down our lives for our children. But how many of us would be willing to sacrifice one of our children for whatever the situation may be? And we just cannot imagine, God has commanded Abraham to take this son Isaac that he loves so much and to offer him as a sacrifice. And there's no hesitation on Abraham's part. There's no, I'm not sure about this, doesn't have to think about it, He immediately proceeds with the plans and goes about doing what God had commanded him to do, even to the point where he is coming down with the knife, ready to kill his son, whenever he is stopped. The angel of the Lord there in verse 12 calls to him from heaven, verse 11, excuse me. The angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, Here I am. And he said, Do not lay your hand on the lad, do anything to him, for now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. So he proved his faithfulness. Well, whenever we face these difficult times, these chapters, in the story of our life, like Kevin talked about this morning, and we have these events that occur and we're challenged, what is our faithfulness going to be like? Will it meet the challenge? Will it be able to overcome the challenge that is before us? We consider Abraham and what he was willing to do because God had commanded him to. What are we willing to do in our lives? How far are we willing to go as well? So the faithfulness is to me, one of the greatest, maybe not the greatest example, obviously Christ, giving his life there on the cross, the faithfulness and obedience that he had to God, willing to give into that plan, that's the greatest sacrifice. But you think about what Abraham was prepared to do because God told him. And again, another great example, one of these characteristics of Abraham that we can maybe try to emulate and try to replicate in our lives. So thinking about that, thinking about those different characteristics, we think about his obedience, willing to leave his home and move into this far-off land, the unselfishness, allowing Lot to have first choice of the land, the courage, the benevolence, the integrity that he showed in fighting against these invading kings, being able to save Lot and then to give of that which the spoils that he had, and then not willing to keep any of the rest of it later on as well. Great examples of his love and his benevolence and his his unselfishness. And then we think about his prayer life, his willingness to continue to entreat God, to ask Him just to step in and to intercede for those people there in Sodom, and then the faithfulness that he showed in willing to give his son as a sacrifice. So think about these, and again, there's others probably that we could look at, but do we have some of these same characteristics? Do we show these same, that I have maybe all of them or maybe some of them? And, well, maybe we can use this as an example that, okay, we can do better. We can do more in our own lives and maybe try to live up to this example, this standard that is set by Abraham. So tonight, if there's anyone here who needs to respond to the invitation, if you're here and you're not a member of the church, you're not a child of God, been baptized, and had your sins washed away, you can do that this evening. Leave here living a new life. Maybe you're already a Christian, and maybe in your life you haven't been showing some of these characteristics, haven't been living a faithful life, an obedient life, like the example that has been set by Abraham, or maybe you have some other things that maybe are missing in your life, you have some other needs that you ask for the prayers of the church, or if you have some other need, whatever it may be, we ask that you come as we stand and sing.